Oh, my dear Indranee Raja, leader of the House of the PAP. Oh my goodness. So, Leong Mun Wai delivered his adjournment motion on government spending. Okay, questioning on the government spending for SPH Media Trust as well as the Sports Hub. Okay, is it called the Sports Hub Limited or something? So, for both instances, government bailing out these big players with huge sums of money to the billions. So this was Leong Mun Wai
and finally
giving the adjournment motion speech in Parliament yesterday, 3rd October
financial
2022.
analysis allows, because it is contractually committed to honor such a generous financial deal for SHPL, will Minister Vivian Balakrishnan, the minister who signed the original contract, come forward and explain why this was necessary. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm worried that the government's behavior in commercial deals can potentially lead to a waste of taxpayers' money. SPH Media Trust and Sports Hub are good examples of this. Together, they cost taxpayers $2.4 billion. This may be small relative to the national reserves and the $130 billion annual revenues at the disposal of the government. But $2.4 billion can go a long way in helping Singaporeans who are struggling financially. For example, it is enough to exempt average Singaporeans from 2 years of additional 2% of GST. Or to
Oh
fund
my God.
10 years
Oh
of
dear.
Comcare cash payouts for the poor Singaporeans. We could also apply the $2.4 billion to help young Singaporeans experiencing great difficulties to buy a HDB flat now, or reducing inflation pressure on all Singaporeans earlier. From a professional point
No
of view,
wonder they hate him. No wonder they hate this
I
guy.
conclude, I believe the government should have spent far less than $2.4 billion on these two projects. The government
All your
owes
money,
Singaporeans
all your
a
taxpayers'
more
money.
detailed explanation
Did you
and should
receive
be
a
proactive
good enough
in exploring ways of reducing the cost.
explanation
to the
that you are
taxpayers.
satisfied with?
This
Ask
House
yourself.
can do a lot more to tighten
Tighten.
oversight of public expenditures.
Vivian
We must not
Balakrishnan,
turn
the
a
same
blind
person
eye
who
to
over-budgeted on YOG, Youth Olympic Games.
expenditures.
Did he
I urge
apologize?
ministers to address my concerns in clarification.
Was he held
to this
accountable?
House. I also hope that this House will refer these two expenditures to the Public Accounts Committee for follow-up after this adjournment motion. Thank you.
Minister Indranee Raja.
Nobody clap. Too few opposition members. Too few. Oh, I see a few there.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the thrust of Mr. Leong's speech is that the government is not fiscally prudent and public expenditure is not well managed. He makes various allegations about the Sports Hub and SPH Media Trust in purported support of these allegations. He says that he requires the government to answer in full. Sir, these assertions are without basis. The government has already responded in full many times.
So your one-sided story is to be taken as the truth and the whole truth. And then when people poke about parts that are questionable, you said, oh, I have already explained. Sounds like a very dubious salesman. MLM.
The issues with regard to the Sports Hub and SPH Media Trust were explained in detail in this House. However, so that members of this House, as well as members of the public, are not misled by Mr. Leong's presentation, let me restate the facts briefly.
Yeah, it's okay, it's okay. No, yeah. All this rubbish, all this nonsense, yeah, we will skip all that. Okay. Because I will skip it too, because after that, Leong replied again, wow, given so much time to rebut without rebutting.
Understand
basically
them.
just saying that, oh, you are casting aspersions, that's all. No answer at all to Leong Mun Wai's probing and questioning. Yeah, so we will skip all that. We will skip all that. You can watch yourself. Parliament sitting 3rd October 2022. You
According
can go
to
to
Standing
MCI
Orders
YouTube. Yeah.
2AB.
Make away $3.9 billion and leaving behind a burden of $900 million for Singapore taxpayer is agreeable by the government. The government accepts that. Secondly, I have offered a lot of information. In her words, an edifice of information. The way she put it is that this information is totally useless. It doesn't help the
Factual
explanation of the
information.
situation.
It's like
But
factual
what I
information.
can
If anything was not factual, Pofma him.
say is that if the government, the second question, if the government did not bother to answer the questions I raised, can the government allege that the information is not useful and so all my allegations are without basis? Thank you.
Minister Indranee Rajah.
With respect to the first question or clarification, the answer is no. I do not agree with what Mr. Leong says. What Mr. Leong fails to understand is
Yeah, not agreeing is okay. We don't have to agree all the time. We are not there to agree with you anyway. But questions need to be answered, and if you can't answer them, you can't answer them. You don't say that the other side posed questions that are out of line.
support put in by the government for SPH Media Trust is because there are certain things that we hold dear. One,
Oh dear,
it is
okay.
to have
This
a
one very
media
important.
that can see things through
This
a
is very
Singaporean
important,
lens.
so
That's
I
that
will
the
repeat
support
this.
put in by the government.
I will
Mr.
repeat
Leong
this
says.
part. This part is
For
very
Mr.
important because
question,
she is trying to not that it is wrong, and not that if what she says is correct, that means you can spend so much money. But let's see if she is even correct on all this defense of the government's spending so much money bailing out SPH Media Trust. Let's see whether they even make, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that even if they were to make sense, even if these defenses make sense, it still does not justify the spending of this huge sum of money, because there may be other ways to go around it. But let's see if they even make sense. Let's see.
clarification, the answer is no. I do not agree with what Mr. Leong says. What Mr. Leong fails to understand is that the support put in by the government for SPH Media Trust is because there are certain things that we hold dear. One, it is to have a media that can see things through a Singaporean lens and that can report things from a domestic viewpoint.
So we need to have a government approved and government run media company to report news from a Singapore lens. This is an utter insult to Singaporeans. I'm sorry. Why can't we have private newspapers, private press? I'm sure in all languages, English, Chinese, Malay, Tamil, maybe you can even have Hindi or Tagalog nowadays, because our resident population is so diverse. The only reason we don't have these private entities is because the PAP doesn't allow it. You can go and see the Printing and Presses Act. Okay? Can you open a private media company and report news from a Singapore lens, from a Singapore perspective? Why can't you? So you are telling me that only the Singapore government is capable of presenting a Singapore lens and a Singapore perspective? The Singapore government equals Singapore. Only the government can represent Singapore, can represent the Singapore perspective. That's what you're trying to tell me. Can we open a private newspaper company and report news from a Singapore lens? Just not the PAP lens, but the Singapore lens. Singapore is not just PAP. We are a democratic country. Please bloody respect that. Okay? So you're trying to tell me you need a government funded entity to represent the Singapore voice, the Singapore perspective. This is an utter insult. I am so appalled that she dares to utter these words in Parliament. She needs to apologize for uttering these words. So I ask again, can Singaporeans open a private newspaper company and report news independently? Maybe we can. I'm not saying we can't. I'm saying go and check the law. I'm saying go and check the law. And do you have enough resources to do that? So she's trying to tell us that no, the SPH is the only one capable of doing that, and so we must protect it. Because, wow, the Singapore voice suddenly becomes so important. The Singapore perspective. And only they can do it. Only the government of Singapore. or a government affiliated, government funded entity can do so. You are admitting we are not a democratic country.
Is very important to us. The second thing is to preserve our vernacular media. That means something. That has value. That is what.
Yeah, again, who was the one who closed down the vernacular newspapers? Nanyang Xiangbao, Nanyang Shangbao, and Xinzhou Ribao. Who were the ones who closed down or merged these newspapers? Who? So we are not capable of printing our own vernacular papers. That is utter rubbish. Utter rubbish.
Supporting, and that is why we are willing to put that money forward to support it for that purpose.
No, I'm
and
not convinced
in
at
pursuit
all.
of those values.
I am not convinced
With
at
respect
all.
to the second thing, Mr. Leong's consistent approach every time the government responds and explains a set of figures, he will ask a question, we will set out the explanation, and that explanation reflects the reasons why these figures are the way they are and what the figures are.
And we are supposed to take it at face value, right? Be like the other party in parliament that accepts every answer from the government.
And say, oh, but what about this? How about if we change that? How about, let's say we have another scenario A? How about scenario B? How about scenario B and a half? How about scenario C? And every time the government is required, according to Mr. Leong, to respond to all of these, which have no bearing to the figures of the original transaction. That is not something which it is a useful use of the government's time.
Yeah, so every other rhetoric that is not fitting the narrative, the grand narrative put out by the PAP, is not a narrative that deserves any airing and attention, that deserves an answer to. That is what they are trying to tell us. Thank you very much.